Hi everyone, and welcome to another of our little lectures for NRS123, and this week the topic is the professional regulation of nurses. So hopefully you are starting to work your way through the modules and readings. This week the reading is based on chapter 8 of your set text from Staunton and Chiarella. A lot of information in it, but I think it is important to focus on the key areas, and I think it helps when I highlight the learning outcomes for the key areas that you really need to understand and focus on this week. So certainly the role of APRA, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in a minute, the role of the Nurses and Midwives Board of Australia, and we're going to also look at just some of the matters in relation to when a complaint is made about a nurse. It's the notification process, because a lot of the cases that we look at throughout this subject are based on real life notifications that were made against nurses for one misdemeanor or another. And the fact that they are made public via, the Healthcare Complaints Commission, it's an awful thing, but also they're very good learning tools. So I just want to highlight that so that for your own study that you can, for example, navigate your way to the HCCC or Healthcare Complaints Commission website and find out recent cases in relation to notifications and published hearings that have been made against nurses. It's a good learning tool. All right, so let's move on to APRA. Again, you'll be reading, but I just like to summarise the main points for you. But APRA is that umbrella or large organisation that is directly reports to the government, which regulates more than 560,000 health practitioners. So it's like a big umbrella organisation that regulates the conduct and the laws surrounding all health practitioners. And all these health practitioners include disciplines such as nursing, podiatrists, psychologist, optometrists, and so on. So there's about 14 or 15 from last count, but the one that obviously we're most familiar with is the Nurses and Midwives Board, because each discipline has their own national board, and that's why APRA overarches all of that. So the legislation that governs, or the law that governs APRA's operation, is of course that really important law that I mentioned in the first lecture. It's the national law. So it's responsible for just making sure that everyone adheres to it. Okay, it's all about, remember, protection of the public. And APRA administers also the national registration and accreditation scheme. So overarching big umbrella organisation, but as nurses, the organisation we will be most familiar with from probably a day-to-day basis and professional perspective is the Nurses and Midwives Board of Australia. Most of you are very familiar with the NMBA. You'll have accessed the website, and we'll do it again just for those who might need a bit of a refresher. But what is the function of the NMBA? Well, that's where you once you complete an accredited course of study, you then make application to the NMBA, Nurses and Midwives, to gain registration. All right, so registered nursing, registers nurses and midwifery students, and also nurse practitioners. It's also responsible for the development of those standards, codes and guidelines, which you should all be very familiar with. For example, your code of conduct, your standards for practice. Remember last week we looked at your professional boundaries, your social media policy, code of ethics, all of that. And I always want to reiterate the importance of these policies and guidelines, because they articulate very, very closely with the actual laws. So the national law is that big overarching legislation. which is very large and just all about safety for the public, and we all need to adhere to it. And the codes and guidelines are directly related to that in a very user-friendly manner. All right, so it's a public declaration. Member of the public can go to the NMBA and look at what nursing standards are, the professional benchmark that we must reach to be, good nurses, if you like, good role models. So it's all there. And again, they're very important, because when a nurse is guilty of not doing the right thing for whatever reason, and a complaint's made against them in relation to their professional conduct or their performance in some way, whether their knowledge, their skill, their conduct, their judgment, it's against these standards, codes and guidelines that they're judged, as well as the particular law. And I remember I said, if it's Poisons and Therapeutic Goods Act, for example, that piece of legislation, but more than likely they'll look at the policy document on handling, medications and so on. So remember how important those policies are. It also handles notifications and complaints. Remember, a notification is another word for a complaint about a nurse. In New South Wales, though, complaints are usually handled by the Healthcare Complaints Commission, and I'll also take you to that website because it's an interesting one, and you can access all the recent notifications that have been made against nurses in the last year. It also, NMBA, assesses overseas trained nurses wishing to practice in Australia. That's why you have the English language proficiency, and, when you come to register, you'll note that there's a number of conditions that you must meet and sort of boxes that you must tick. All right. It approves accreditation standards, and certainly for all courses that deliver a Bachelor of Nursing to students, all of those courses must be accredited. It's very important. And above all, remember, the NMBA is responsible for protection of the public. A lot of nurses seem to think that it's there to support them and help them. Well, yes, it is, because it's there as an information repository for all of your codes and guidelines, but do remember that it's your union that is there for particular support should you need them, and the NMBA is more likely to the one protection of the public. All right, so let's move on. Notifications and complaints. I suppose the main thing, and again, make sure you read, it's a lot more information in your chapter, but suffice to say that complaints against nurses or notifications generally fall into two major categories, and that is unsatisfactory professional conduct and professional misconduct. So we'll just look at the first one, unsatisfactory professional conduct. I suppose, what can a notification or a complaint be about? Well, it's very varied. A person, it could be something about their health, if they have an impairment. For example, a nurse may have a physical or mental impairment, disability, condition or disorder, including substance abuse, drug abuse, alcohol, that detrimentally affects or is likely to affect their practice of the profession. So that's one way. Professional conduct of a nurse is when they meet a lesser standard that is reasonably expected by the public or their peers. And again, that's why if a complaint is lodged, there's a big investigation. It's not just a cut and dry thing. There's an investigation. It's very thorough, and to see if it's a vexatious complaint or actually it has grounds to go further, okay? So some of the things where you can be charged with unsatisfactory professional conduct when you're in breach of the national law. It's an offence affecting your suitability to practice, and where your conduct affects patient care or another health professional. So that's extremely broad. But it's probably, if you want to distinguish between unsatisfactory professional conduct and professional misconduct, I think unsatisfactory professional conduct is usually the lesser of the two, where, particularly in relation to your performance or your knowledge or your skill. It's something that you just, your knowledge is lacking. And that's in the case, the HCCC v Maloney. You can go on to the Healthcare Complaints Commission site and find this case. But that was the case where the nurse worked in triage, Maloney. She worked in triage, and a patient presented and she gave wrong information. She gave out drugs without supervision and without a prescription. And yes, there was a whole list of things that demonstrated that her ability to perform her job in the area of triage was well below the standard expected. So she was went to a hearing, a disciplinary hearing, and yes, she was found guilty of unsatisfactory professional conduct. What happened to her? Well, she was given a notification on her registration, and she had to complete a FLEC course, which is a course that is specifically designed for nurses working at that higher level in triage, and she had to do a few other things. All right, so unsatisfactory professional conduct, important that you recognise the difference between that and professional misconduct. And all the cases we look at throughout the session will allude to one or the other. All right, so professional misconduct, that's a lot more serious, all right? And the board, APRA, and the profession view this really, really seriously. And this is conduct that is substantially below that which is reasonably expected. So things like sexual abuse, theft, when you're a repeat offender, for example, there's more than one instance of unprofessional conduct. So in relation to your performance, you sort of have a disciplinary hearing and you're sort of disciplined, and then you do further study, but it doesn't make any difference. And that's when they'll professional misconduct. And usually that means that you will lose your registration. Your conduct's not consistent with being a fit and proper person to hold registration. Now, if you look at the Shah case, which is on page 258 of your text, he was found guilty of professional misconduct. His name was ordered to be removed from the register for a period of at least 12 months prior to reapplication. And you've looked at that in your tute, so it was pretty bad. And one of the main things he did was he didn't try to protect his patients. So that's looked at really, really poorly. All right, so the complaint process, well, just, you won't just have an awareness of it. But basically, when a notification is made, it can come from a patient, it can come from a colleague, an institution, a member of the public. It can really come from anywhere. And that's why you're always given a fair go, because unfortunately, vexatious complaints can and are done. So it'd be an awful thing. It's dreadful if someone even lodges a vexatious complaint, because once APRA or the HCCC receives a complaint, then there is a preliminary assessment and you have to respond. Obviously, with a vexatious complaint, it would then be thrown out, but it's nonetheless extremely stressful for the person concerned. And obviously, when anything like this ever occurs, that's when I would encourage you always to seek advice in the form of your union legal representation, because the investigative process is very rigorous. You have to respond with statements and so on, and you'll need help doing that. So yes, and depending on the seriousness of it, if it's usually the lesser type, unsatisfactory professional conduct, might just go to a disciplinary hearing panel, which is still like a legal little court, if you like, but probably less less scary, I suppose, than the actual tribunal, which is stage 5 and usually for the very serious one. So, all right, so the complaint process is covered. Anyone can make a complaint, and once that notification is lodged, it's all about protection of the public, and they'll scrutinise you. Okay, so very scary. Now, there's just some references for you, but what I might do now is just pause for a minute, and then I'm going to just take you to the actual websites that I've been talking about, because I know you'll cover them in the tutorials, but you might find this useful as well. So, hello again, just I've changed my screen. So what you should be looking at now is the Nursing and Midwifery Board link. So just click on that. And as I say, most of you are very familiar with this website, but again, from a legal perspective, some of the areas that you might wish to look at are registration and endorsement, the different types, mandatory registration requirement, criminal history registration, all of those sorts of things. All right. The other important area is registration standards. I know that a number of third years, get concerned when they're presenting for registration, and they might have a parking ticket or a speeding fine and everything else. So again, there you can look at criminal history. It'll give you actually, remembering the function of the NMBA is to monitor and make sure everyone's meeting their correct standards to gain and maintain their registration. So, again, if you're concerned about English language skills, it'll all be there, and so on. You're probably most familiar with your policies and professional standards. Remember, these are the laws, or the user-friendly version of the law. All right, so this is the site. Keep it as your favourite. Really, really important. All right, so that's the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia. And there, if you click on the link, I'll just move over here. There's the link to APRA. Remember, which is the big overarching body. And that just, oh look, here we have all the different disciplines that come under APRA. So how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Oh, there's still 14. OT and so on. I just couldn't remember when I was talking about them. All right. But, yep, that's the one. The other really important website that I think you will get a lot out of in this subject is the Healthcare Complaints Commission. So that, again, remember when we're looking at cases and we're talking about hearings and decisions, here was where we go. You click on here and let's just look at some of the tribunal hearings. Let's see, it's a little bit slow. Now, you'll sometimes see this when you're looking at the actual documents, if you should look at the case, the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal hearings, and it's somewhat the acronym NCAT, all right? But we'll do that in the tutorial when we're actually looking at them. Okay. Now, they're usually decisions. No, let's just go back there. Hearings and decisions. Let's go professional standards. This is the one that I want. All right. Professional Standards Committee hearings. Hearings before the Professional Standard Committees are generally held in public in New South Wales, and parties can be legally represented. Remember when I said you'd go to a panel, the lesser form? This is it, the Professional Standards Committee. And then the more serious one is that tribunal. But a list of current hearings regarding nurses and midwives can be accessed at this, and this will take you to the New South Wales Nursing and Midwifery Council. Okay, so let's just look at the left-hand side and look at some of the decisions made. Remembering we're looking at notifications that were made against nurses who did something wrong. So let's look at, these ones were tribunal, they're fairly serious, and professional standards or the lesser panel. Usually this one will have, well, can have both, but professional misconduct and unsatisfactory professional conduct, but you just have to sift through them. Nonetheless, they're quite interesting. So let's just look at this one. We'll look at the case of Daniel Travis Emery, and this is how public it is, guys. I mean, there's no hiding. So again, it's a legal public document, and it's a court, and this is the acronym New South Wales. That one. Civil and Tribunal. Yeah, that one there. Okay, it should be NCAT, but anyway, a little bit different. But let's look at some of the catchwords. He was charged with unsatisfactory professional conduct and professional misconduct. So we can assume that this nurse, Daniel, was pretty bad. And yeah, allegations that the respondent attended to the PCA device when there was no clinical indication to do so, obtained the ward key in circumstances where the respondent had been directed not to handle drugs, inappropriately obtained, it's all to do with drugs. Stealing drugs, really bad. All right, so that is that case. And of course, you've been looking at Bhavesh Shah, but I just wanted to show you where you can find all that information. So hopefully that will, help you there. So, yep, you can go back and you can look at them at leisure. Let's look at some of the PSC decisions for April. And this one, Professional Standards Committee. I'm trying to get my screen in for you, but yes. Well, this one, it must be said that this case is laced with utter tragedy. It concerns the conduct of nursing staff at Dubbo Base when a young man tragically took his own life while an involuntary patient in the mental health unit. So there's a case that you can read at your own leisure. And of course, involuntary patient, we'll be looking at all of that under the Mental Health Act. So hopefully that's piqued your interest, knowing that these are excellent resources for you in your studies to use, but most importantly, just introducing you to some of the terminology and language. All right, so I think I've gone on long enough. I tried to keep these to 15 minutes, but I think I've gone way over. Okay, guys, I'll leave you there and hopefully you get something out of this. Thank you.